Accommodation Tax AD-Hoc Committee to order. And I just want to welcome everybody here. Thanks for coming on this very blustery day. And look forward to the discussions that we're going to be having. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, a moment of silent reflection, and the respectful conduct statement. So we acknowledge that Stratford is situated on lands shared between many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples today. As a city, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. Today we acknowledge the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the neutral Adirondack peoples, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, and play on this land. Thank you. Now I'll read the Respect in Stratford statement. The Corporation of the City of Stratford is committed to providing quality service to all members of the public, council, and our employees. Our goal is to promote a safe, healthy, respectful, inclusive, and positive environment. We have a responsibility to treat people with respect by creating safe and respectful spaces. It is the city's expectation that all present will be respectful. Okay, item 2 is the introduction of the members of the committee. So I guess maybe we'll start with me. I'm Jody Burback, I'm a city councillor, and this is my 7th year on council. And yeah, I sit on a lot of committees, and I'm really happy to be here to chair this one and have some good discussion. So maybe we'll go to John next.
My name is John Hatton. My wife and I own Avery House Bed and Breakfast, and we also are the founders of Discover Stratford, which is a directory of accommodations of various forms here in town. And I volunteered to be on this project because I'm a marketing and strategy guy, and I thought that might be a good addition to the discussion.
My name is Nathan Schleicher. I am here as the citizen part of the committee, and my background is in industrial design, specifically for play spaces, and I've had the opportunity to work with municipalities and architects and landscape architects across North America, and have projects in San Francisco to Saskatchewan. So,
I'm Cameron Ullman. I'm with Town Crier Marketing. Been in operation for about 5 years, trying to support the businesses in town, keep the money in town. And we also operate the Shop Stratford digital platform as kind of a cheerleader for local businesses, and been watching the role that the short-term accommodators and those types of businesses play in the community, and very interested in helping out.
I'm Jen Birmingham. I'm the large accommodator representative. I currently own the Bruce Hotel. Before that, I had B&Bs in the city and outside of the city in Tavistock. I've been in the industry for 28 years. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And maybe I'll get some staff intros too.
Okay, yep. I'm part of the committee, just here as a resource and a sort of a, I'll call it like a translator to put whatever we decide here into some document and guidelines that council can use to move forward. So I'm Carmen Kruger, I'm the treasurer and director of corporate services for the city, and so my first involvement in this was rolling it out from a revenue perspective for the city, and then I brought with me, since then, we've created a different role in the city with the manager of revenue and taxation, so I brought with me Ashley Price, and so she can say anything further. Great.
Currently manager of revenue and taxation. I've been with the city going on for 9 years. I've always had a role in finance, so starting as finance clerk and kind of just moving my way up. So the last year I've been manager and worked closely with Carmen.
Hi everyone, my name is Tatiana Defoe. I'm the clerk for the City of Stratford. I've been with the city since about 2017 and clerk since about 2020. My main role is to assist you with procedures. I also work with a team in clerks who will prepare agendas, minutes, basically all the nuts and bolts that go in behind the scenes for an ad hoc committee.
I'm Vicki Trotter. I am the council committee coordinator, and I will be acting as a recording secretary for this committee.
Okay, thanks everyone. Item 3, we have declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Anybody have?
I did mention in passing that Discover Stratford has an interest in driving guests, customers to the membership of accommodators. So I think that's, I don't know if that qualifies, but just to be upfront about it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's I mean, we sort of all come to this with somewhat of an interest, right?
Just being transparent.
So, absolutely, thank you for that. Okay, so we have item 4, so we've added an addendum, so I don't know if everyone got the email, but we have an addendum here that's, there's a motion that the addendum to the Municipal Accommodation Tax Ad Hoc Committee agenda dated January 29th, 2026, be added to the agenda and printed to include the following. So under public engagement activities, Barb Shaughnessy requested to speak to the committee to provide her opinion on the survey. So what I need is that somebody put forward a motion that we adopt the addendum. Okay, thank you. And because it's committee, we only need a motion. Motion made, we don't need a seconder. So I'll call all in favor. And that carries. Thank you. So Barb will get you to come when we get to that part of the discussion. Okay, so that means we're on to item for discussion, item 5. So the first one we have is the draft use of the municipal accommodation tax and reserve fund policy. So we've attached a bunch of things in the addendum, or the agenda. We had terms of reference for our ad hoc committee. That was sort of the first thing. So maybe we'll see if anybody has a question about that or comment. Carmen?
I just have a comment just for the benefit of the committee. So the Stratford, there's a management report that's attached there that was prepared back in September by me. And we had started at the staff level to prepare a policy for council to kind of help guide some of the decision making around the revenues prior to the establishment and the direction to establish this committee. So please don't take it as as it being etched in stone whatsoever. It was really just a really rough draft at that time, and we stopped as soon as this committee was going to proceed. So so there's some ideas in there that can form part of our discussion, and then also as well as some of the other attachments that were provided as well that are some additional and maybe even like converse suggestions. That's totally okay. So just want to throw that out there for the context. So
May I ask a question? Are you asking for feedback on terms of reference or on this?
Yeah, why don't we start with the terms of reference and see if anybody has any comments or thoughts on those. It's pretty standard committee term of reference, how we operate. Committee does tend to be a little less formal than council, and I'm happy to use first name basis and just make it a little more comfortable. Hopefully, we have to be in these formal chambers, but it's nice to be a little more relaxed at this type of meeting. So, yeah. So if nobody has any comments or questions about the terms of reference, then we'll go ahead with those. So we do have a couple of reports attached, as Carmen was saying, a possible policy draft. So I guess we can start the conversation with, there was a draft policy, so what do you think of it? Do you have thoughts? Do you have, is it way off base? Are we close? There was definitely, I think the way that the draft policy was structured was a project basis. So it looks like, people, the city could suggest certain types of projects that meet certain type of criteria in order to access the MAT money. So that's one approach that we could use. As Carmen was saying, we don't have to do it that way. But it's a thought about how we might move forward. So I don't know if anybody had any comments just in general about that sort of framework that we might use.
Sorry, that's the document titled the Corporation of the City of Stratford Policy Manual? Okay.
Let me just see what the title is here. Got them all open and separate. So it's called the draft, yes, right at the top, Corporation of the City of Stratford Policy Manual, and then in quotes it says, use of municipal accommodation tax and reserve fund policy. And I don't know what page that is on the agenda. 6. 6? Page 6 on the agenda. So yeah, I thought maybe we could start here, if you've reviewed it, to sort of discuss whether that's sort of the approach that we want to take. I mean, if you have any comments sort of in general, I know, John, you had some ideas sort of for the committee as a whole, what is our aim? So I think from our terms of reference and so on, that like our main goal, as I understand it, for this committee is to be able to create this policy that then council will use to spend the fat tax. So I'm just curious as to maybe what you were thinking about, like bringing in as far as the marketing perspective.
Yeah, I'll kick things off with two categories of comments. First, I think that there's some problems with the draft version, in terms of a strategic framework, but also compliance with legal as well as judicial findings. So I think that's an important conversation. But the bigger idea, the bigger problem I have is it feels like we're building a house, as in a policy, without any blueprint. We haven't decided or defined that I know of some key parameters around who is our target, what's our consumer proposition, how are we going to measure those things. I think all those need to be answered before we can say, are we going to sponsor a puppet festival or a coat-making festival? I don't think we have a framework for answering those questions.
Okay. So my thoughts are that the policy maybe is sort of pointing us in that direction, but that people would have to come forward with ideas, and that on the other side that we would have some sort of maybe to approve or disapprove it. Am I getting that right, Carmen?
Yeah. So just, I hear what you're saying, and I think where you're going with the specific pieces would be more sort of as a follow-up. The policy is really just a guiding document, whereas I think what you're suggesting is that, and again, if we want to establish, and maybe I didn't understand you correctly, but if we're talking about establishing like sort of the overarching like types of projects we would fund, like I'm not sure if that's the gist of most policies, but I'm happy to, if you clarify.
So how do we, honest question, or sincere question, how do we draw a roadmap when we don't know where we're going?
Well, typically the policy framework structure isn't the roadmap, it's the guiding document. The roadmap then gets derived from that. So as long as you're philosophically in line with the broader goals of any policy, not just this one, then you can start to refine where exactly or which specifics you're talking about. At least that's been my experience.
So I think the phrase you used was, or the word you used was a guideline, is that right? So how do you design a guideline when you don't have a philosophical concept to determine that guidelines?
Good question, but I think that's the point of the policy. And again, we stopped with the policy draft as soon as we realized that this committee was going to get established. So if we want to modify, enhance, change altogether the overarching framework, then we can totally do that.
So just one person's opinion, I'd love other people to chime in.
Yeah.
I don't think you can write a policy before you have a strategic framework.
And so the strategic piece, so just bear with me here
Yeah.
as I think this through. So a lot of the, like the provincial legislation prescribes like some of the things that we can and can't do. It's not really restrictive or prescriptive, but it does, it's sort of the primary, I'll say governance document for lack of a better word. And then from there, you know, it's really just intended to be for tourism related, you know, purposes, right? It's really, really vague. So as far as a roadmap goes, that's the purpose of this committee, is to come up with some ideas and suggestions on what makes sense from a strategic priorities perspective for council. So again, and tying it sort of back into some of their strategic objectives and that sort of thing.
So if I understood right, what we're being asked to do is provide support, guidance, and strategic advice in forming a policy. And I'm saying I don't think you can do that until you have a strategy. Who are we talking to? What's our message? How are we going to measure success? I don't think you can build a policy that says here's how we're going to evaluate projects until you define what are we doing up here. So who's our target? This is a starting point.
Council. This is a council-approved policy.
Yeah, I guess to get council to approve the policy is the goal, maybe. But the goal is to figure out. So we've got, you know, the overarching idea is that we've got this MAT money. Half of it's going to Destination Stratford. The other half is sort of, council can decide whatever it wants to how to spend. So the idea of the policy is to give council direction to say, these are the parameters that we'd like you to use to spend this MAT money in a particular way. Council doesn't have to do that, but when we have a policy, then it's, you know, it gives us, like you're saying, a roadmap to be like, okay, these are the types of things we want to spend this money on. Otherwise, we can just be like, oh yeah, well, you know, we need to repave. It won't be very much of a stretch of road, but so when you look at the draft policy, and then it's on page 20 of the agenda, this one, there's six general categories that sort of we pulled out to say, okay, these are the areas that perhaps this money needs to go towards. So the first one is sport, event, conference, attraction, and servicing. So that's a general category. The next one is network development and education. So that one is more like sort of maybe tourism, education, and enhancement. It's a little more vague, but when you drill down into it, it talks about the tourism sector. So it's kind of bolstering up the tourism sector. So if somebody had a project that would, you know, bring in some experts on different types of tourism, that we could use that money to support that type of event. Tourism product development. So if an organization was going to develop and enhance visitor-oriented products, it says here. So if you're thinking about a product that maybe would bring people to Stratford, could that be one of the type of events that we want to support with this money? Another one is visitor services enhancements. So this is something I think Destination Stratford probably already does, so that may be a bit of an overlap, but that's resources to support visitor information. That could actually be a support of what you're doing as well, right? Providing resources to support visitors, including digital and print, so that it helps people who want to come and make their stay a little easier. Wayfinding and signage, getting people getting around town. Placemaking and infrastructure enhancement. That one is more development of public land, infrastructure. So I'm thinking if you're concentrating on, say, cycle tourism, which I have a real interest in, then, you know, maybe somebody would come forward with something to say, hey, we need a bike path here, which would then enhance our tourism. So these are the suggested sort of broad areas that we may think is appropriate. So I guess the idea of this group is to say, okay, are these areas the ones we want to concentrate on? Are there more? Or are there things that we want to narrow down a little bit? Jennifer?
So for me, I think there's two ways to look at the money and then this. Is this just a pot of money that is going to be spent? I think there is this sense in council, in this community, that this is passive revenue. For those of us that actually generate it, it is not. So if we're looking at $300,000 in this reserve fund, it takes us $7.6 million of revenue to generate that. So for us, I think, this is not about spending this money because it's gonna run out and we're the ones that have to generate it. So the other way to look at this is taking this money and getting an ROI on it. And I think that speaks to how the policy is written. Are we looking at this as money that's there and when it's gone? Or is this something that we need to adjust the policy so that it addresses the fact that this needs to be not just regenerated, but hopefully in years increased? And for me, a lot of what's in here and how it's worded and what the options are that we provide or the direction that we give depends on how we're looking at that pot of money.
We're going to run out of money before we run out of ideas.
If people don't come to Stratford and aren't paying their fat tax, then yes. But if the goal, one thing I kind of liked about this policy, and I don't know number-wise, I know that there were some highlights on there, but one of the criteria could be that these events will generate overnight stays. However, you can figure out how to measure that, or is it even possible to measure? But that would be the self-generated part, I think.
Absolutely. And one idea that I was thinking about is the goal of this policy is to generate more math than expense.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But to what you just said, and as you walked through all these different ideas, those are all tactics, right?
Right.
You said, well, maybe we could target overnight guests. That happens to be a hot button for some of us anyhow. My point is answering that question, who are we selling what product to? Is it overnight guests? Is it day trippers? Is it locals who are coming to look at pretty lights? There has to be a definition of who our target is. What kind of product are we trying to sell them? How are we going to measure? Did we increase overnight stays or not? Before we get to should it be a soccer club, I think we need to answer some of those much higher level questions. And I think, I am no lawyer and I'm certainly not involved with the political side, but that decision that just came out of Niagara Falls last year says that you have to have a strategy if you visit and revisit, and I don't think we have it.
Just on that, I think, I hear where you're coming from, and I think that's also where many of the members of the committee are coming from, as far as tourism development, for lack of a better word, or how do we build that piece? But that's not really what this objective is for this policy. This is an administrative policy to help guide what we do with the money if and when we have it. How we get it, or whether we increase it, or whether we target certain groups or not, isn't really the scope of this policy. This policy is really just to administer what is generated, whether that's $1 or $300,000 or $1 million, whatever the number.
But it does start to comment on that when it says sports events and network development and tour. Those are ideas, right?
Yeah.
How do we know those ideas reinforce the strategy that we want to pursue? Right, so disclosure, if it was my magic wand, I would say our strategy is to drive incremental overnight stays. But somebody could easily say, and the reason for that is because the target is worth more to us. Somebody who comes for an overnight stay is worth more to the city than a day trip. But I think we need to start with that fundamental conversation. Who are we trying to attract? as we spend this MAC money, where are we going to get the best return to get more MAC? So we're not spending that and not getting any MAC back.
And I hear what you're saying. I don't disagree. I just think it's not the policy part, it's the pre-policy part. Or do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like the strategy is more of a corporate strategy or a city strategy rather than this MAT policy.
But then, I'm sorry, but then you have in here in the, and again, I understand it's draft, but it very specifically lays out what, like, wayfinding assignment, like they're concrete
Tactics.
examples in
Just grabbed off of random samples that are out there, right? It was really not any, it was really just to illustrate that this is what this can look like. With those, if we want to take wayfinding signs out and put overnight accommodation stays in, something like that, that's what we're here for.
No, see, the concern or the fear I have is that we end up arguing tactics, right? Should we go after sports marketing, or should we go after a jazz festival, or should we spend money repaving over here? We end up arguing tactics.
What do I know about this policy if we're allowing, if it's set up the way I think it's set up, that we would basically open it up to the sector to say, what are your ideas? How can we bring people here? And our goal is, like we can put in here, our goal is to have overnight visitors. So propose to us an event, right? Like bring an event, but the event would have to then, tick one of these boxes. So if we wanted to get rid of wayfinding and different things, like maybe that's what we do, and then we just say, the criteria for this event is like X number of dollars generated, or however we decide we're going to be actually able to measure it if we want to be practical. But, with the overarching goal of overnight stays makes sense to me, because then it's, like you said, it's self-generated revenue.
Perpetual motion, yeah.
Exactly, and then, overnight guests totally makes sense, because an overnight guest is also a day visitor, right? Because they're spending money in shops.
Can I ask probably a naive question?
Go ahead.
The Niagara on the Lake example in here, this is the criteria, and so we're saying that's completely different than the policy.
That's right.
Okay, because this feels more clear to me because it's referencing a town strategic plan and a town tourism strategy as the very first things, which I think is sort of what you're saying is like, okay, so this is referencing something that must already exist in Niagara. They have those two things.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what our relationship is to that example versus this example.
Well, I like the criteria, first of all, but I would point out we do have a tourism strategy for that destination. Stratford created with a regenerative tourism lens
Right.
So
on it.
I'm familiar with that.
So there's another example where strategic planning needs to inform, are we trying to be synergistic with what Destination Stratford is doing, or are we trying to supplement?
I think
I'm not looking for an answer.
I would say be synergistic, but that's just off the top of my head. We
So
want
why don't
everyone working together in the same direction.
But that would imply that you just give them the other half, right? If it's going to reinforce what they're already doing, why are you duplicating? I'm not saying we should do that, but that's kind of the foundational questions that I think we need to answer before we can form a policy. I think what I'm suggesting we should deliver ultimately as our product output is a strategic framework for evaluating MAD initiatives.
Yeah, I think that's what this policy kind of aims towards, and like I said, this definitely is a draft. So I think what we need to do as a committee then is to kind of go through that. Are there pieces in here that we want to keep? Are there pieces that we want to get rid of? Or do we want to just adopt a completely different strategy? We don't necessarily even have to go with the grants and funding type model. We could go with something totally different. My own personal opinion, I kind of like the grants and funding idea where, we're looking at large events. I also like the idea of, infrastructure and sort of placemaking events. Like, that it wouldn't necessarily be all events, so that the people who have different ideas that might be coming from different perspectives would also be able to promote their project and possibly get funding. I did have a question for Carmen, actually, because in the staff report, probably the first one from 2024,
Okay.
it kind of said, well, we don't really have the capacity to set up another program with an approval process. So what does it look like now? Because that's 2 years ago. Do we have the capacity? So the way that I would compare it to our community grants program. So right now we have a community grants program, it's a pot of money, and people apply, and then we have a committee of council and staff that will go through, and again, there was a policy actually generated just when I got on council, similar to this, to say, okay, what these events have to be community oriented and so on. So do we have the capacity? Like, could we set up another committee like that? Are we going to fold it in with the?
No, it would be separate. It would be a separate committee if we're going to do it. But I would say in terms of capacity, not really. But I will say that where we would gain some value in a similar type of structure for the MAT is in having a well-defined criteria, which we didn't do consultation with that one, right? So at the time, so I think that's where this group will bring value to.
Yes.
To having those criteria be very well defined. And I like the Niagara on the Lake criteria as well. I think it's really specific and like it will help to, I'll say, prioritize or rank submissions, right? Something like that would, like, it doesn't have to be exactly like that. We can pick our own criteria and add stuff in there, but I think that's where, and to me that's sort of the appendix to the policy, because that's sort of how we administer it. Right? How, like the specifics of the how. I kind of make the distinction between a policy being sort of the overarching philosophy and the procedure being the nitty-gritty of how you actually get there.
So I love the idea of a set of criteria to evaluate competing proposals or ideas, because otherwise you just end up with opinions.
Yep.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to keep us wary of is designing that list of criteria is premature before you say, what's our strategy? Who are we trying to bring in? Okay, now let's develop a list of criteria that says, is that true to our strategy or not? I don't know how you develop a list of vital signs for a project without having a strategy. Who are we going after? Is it day trippers? Is it festival fans that we want to attack on additional? I mean, there's all kinds of directions we could go. Jody, you said that you liked this idea, you liked that idea. That's what I'm afraid of, is it becomes likes as opposed to metric.
Well, that's where we need to be a committee saying yay or nay based on X criteria, right? So not just somebody's like, I love cycling, so I'm going to approve every cycling thing, right? So that can happen now at council with this map. So it would be great to have, to have it set out to say these are the criteria, and like you say, we need an overarching goal for sure. It has, I think we all agree it has to be tourism related.
The law says so.
The law says so, but that, it should be pretty
That can be broad.
flexible. So yeah, so definitely.
But I think that's another parameter we need to be real specific.
If we can agree on what that overarching, what strategy, what is our ROI, what is our outcome? What is the outcome we're looking for with the spending of that money?
Am I allowed to float a framework to this group, or
Sure.
are we just brainstorming at this point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the document I gave you already.
Which document is this? Or did you?
It's just it's still warm from the printer.
Oh, right.
Anybody missing? Do we have any extras? Yeah, so this wasn't like officially submitted.
Okay, gotcha.
This is, as I said up front, I'm a fish out of the water here. I'm used to dealing in a corporate environment at the board of director level, where it's much less scripted. So I didn't really know how to launch an idea into this discussion, and that's what this is meant to do, is to share an idea. And so I just repeated the mandate from the document that we got, right? And I tried to give sources for every statement here on the second page. But we're supposed to provide guidance, support, and strategic advice. That's good. What I'm saying is that we should use a practical, pragmatic, strategic planning method to define our map policy. So start up here, and then the policy should fall out of it as a result. Without a strategy, it turns into likes. I like this, I don't like that. I don't know how you build a list of criteria to evaluate ideas if you don't have a definitive answer to who are we going after, what's our message, what's our approach to driving those people. Who are we driving? Are soccer moms coming for a sports conference? Is that true to our strategy versus the Illinois Shakespeare Society? Which one's worth more to us? Right? And I think we need to have a valuation discussion before we can decide who our target is. Other municipalities have gone before us, which is great. I've shared with the group a couple of examples. So I think we can learn from their experiences in building our strategy, but we also need to keep in mind that we're different from a lot of places. And then we've got some serious legislative and judicial and Stratford own language that puts really tight fences around what we can and can't do. And I think that needs to be part of our strategy, is this is fair game and this is not. Therefore, I would like to suggest that we use a strategic planning model and that we hold up spending any of the city's portion of that and hold up on any initiatives like a survey or like a draft plan or whatever the language was until we align on a strategy. And then I've got some hows there, but I'm not going to dive into that. Is that the kind of idea that this group is looking for?
Well, it seems to me that the how is like, this could be the structure to lead our discussion around the policy that we want to create.
That
Like
was my
answering those questions are a great way to create that policy. To me, that makes sense. So that would give us a framework rather than maybe starting with this. We can start with answering each of these questions as a group. So that probably, I don't know if we can do all that today. People.
We can identify some areas where we agree and maybe other areas where there's more homework to do. But if we did all that, then we could come back to the draft policy statement, I think you call it, and say, does that measure up to the strategy that we just discussed? Does it reinforce and pay off the strategy we just developed?
There's a reference to, sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
There's a reference to Destination Stratford and synergy there, so are we going to be duplicating efforts that they've already done by going down this
Strategic
path?
question. Absolutely.
So like if we already have something existing that we trust and or that lays out a strategy for 5 years or 10 years, shouldn't that be what we weigh?
We could
and say this is there's two criteria in this Niagara thing. There's the town strategy and the town tourism strategy. So you already sort of have potentially 50% of that checked off the destination.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one could be, because this is specific to map.
We do have a city strategy, strategic initiatives in the plan.
And so, I mean, I would have a lot of questions about how often is that a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, whatever, how does that get revisited? So if those things already exist, it would be great to just sort of like point to those and we can do our homework and come back after we do it.
I'm not trying to create work or invent new stuff. There might be different opinions around the table around the Destination Stratford strategy. which would be good to discuss. And then the other point that came up is, do we spend right along with them, which is synergy? Or is the mandate of the city's half of the fund to do stuff that's not on Destination Stratford's radar? I don't think we have an answer to that, and that seems like a fundamental strategic question.
I'm just thinking about Destination Stratford, or whether, I know they do some small grants to people for doing projects, but nothing of this scale. So if we, you know, I don't think we'd be overlapping with something that they are already doing directly.
So then it's complementary?
It is complementary. Carmen has something.
So
Well,
I was
I was just gonna talk again about the strategic planning approach. Like, again, like you mentioned, Councilor Vermack, like the city's got 50 different strategic plans of varying types. Destination Stratford has their strategic plan for varying types. The purpose, like again, I'm coming back to this and being an administrative policy rather than developing a tourism or destination strategy. So it kind of like, I think that's where, and I appreciate what you're saying that, you know, how can you do one without the other? But you can, because we've been collecting the mat for, what, 4 years?
You've been collecting it, but we don't have a framework that we've all aligned
to spend it or allocate it. That's right, and that's what this purpose is. But the framework to spend or allocate it is not, I mean, it's related, but it's not dependent on the strategy for whether we recruit overnight guests or whether we, you know, like target soccer moms or whatever, some of those examples, right?
So would the policy include the criteria that we were talking about? How do you evaluate and rack and stack these different ideas? Would that be part of the policy?
Well, do you mean like the different ideas in terms of who to give the funds to or what to spend the money on?
Yeah, so you've got 2 proposals.
Yep.
One is about this fabulous day tripping. Come to Stratford for a day trip.
Yep.
Come at 9 in the morning and be done 5 in the afternoon, off you go. The other is come and see a play at night.
Yep.
Do this dinner, have brunch the next morning. But how would we evaluate which one to go after
Right.
without a strategy?
Based on the parameters of the allocation model that we decide on. So like if you look at even the Niagara on the Lake parameters.
So
right?
what's that look like for us, an allocation?
Well, that's what we're here to talk about. Again, I don't know that we have to necessarily come at it from a citywide strategic.
No, not citywide. The idea is, what's our strategy for spending the city's portion of that?
Okay.
How do you come up with a list of criteria without a strategy? Right? How do we evaluate different initiatives that are being proposed?
I guess again, I stand to be changing my mind on this, but my thoughts is that the strategy is the parameters, right? It's like we decide as a group sort of we would consider funding these 10 different types of things, soccer moms, whatever, or one thing. Maybe it's only it could be a range of things, or it could be a singular, right? And then as a group, we establish what that looks like, and then we come up with how are we going to evaluate it? So if we say, for example, I took notes already on this about if we want to generate overnight stays because that has a longer lasting benefit to the community than day trippers, let's just say, then that's a great starting point or a great addition to sort of then say, well, you know what, then the application A that you mentioned, they're disqualified because they're not generating that stay, or there's less demonstrable evidence that they are.
So there's 2 really cool phrases that I heard you use. One was asset allocation, which I love. And it's been a while since finance modeling, but wouldn't an allocation model be driven by how do we maximize ROI as how we allocate this MAC money? How do you have that conversation to say which of these different projects is more valuable to the city until we have a strategy that says we're going to use the example that I lean into, and then the point is we'll debate it. Our strategy is to drive overnight stays, and the way we're going to measure that is occupancy rates. or MAT revenues. Our overarching goal is to spend MAT to make MAT. In fact, spend MAT to make more MAT.
So I was just thinking about, like, if we're looking at general criteria or parameters, let's say for events, one way to kind of encourage overnight stays would be to have the criteria, this has to be a multi-day event. Like that's
Great.
That's a very simple way to do it, but just say, like, if you're applying for this, it has to be a 2 or more day event.
And see, that's what I love about having a strategy first. It's because then somebody can float a cool idea and we can say, yeah, 3 days makes sense. We could overnight stay, got it, that's our strategy. If somebody says, I want to spend it on upgrading the park plant that's out there, first of all, you have to make the leap that that's strategic tourism instead of direct tourism. And second, what kind of ROI? How much more money are you going to get from fixing up a park versus a 3-day retreat? Well, if our
That's a
criteria...
little more existential. It's hard to measure, right? Improving a park.
What would your intuition say?
I think that if it's, you know, people come here and they're like, Stratford's so beautiful, like beautiful park system. So like if we have that general impression that people are going to want to come and stay, then, you know, it's hard to measure, but I think it's important.
So I think that,
you know,
that's exactly the kind of debate we should have. Should we be spending money on anything that we can't measure?
Yeah.
I think it's a strategic question. You can say yes or no.
Yeah.
Should we be replicating Destination Stratford, or should we be complementing? Are we pursuing day trippers because they can do the bacon and ale trail or hit the chocolate shops, whatever, lots of cool ideas, or do we want to have a 3-day jazz festival?
Because I think, to me, I don't know if this is explicitly a part of their policy, which I reviewed this morning, but it won't load. Anyway, I do know that they're very focused on sort of shoulder season and off season.
Right.
So that doesn't necessarily mean overnight stays. So, you know, if we
Explicitly,
had a slightly different focus, that would make sense. It would be complementary, but not putting all our resources towards the same type of thing.
See, the reason I think it's worthwhile taking a look at Destination Stratford strategy is I don't think that they are driven by driving MAT. They're spending MAT, but they're not driven to increase MAT. It's a strategic
I think
call.
they would. I think it's like they wouldn't be sad about it, but no, I don't think that's the purpose. Is to,
Yeah,
to
so
create more.
I think back to what Jennifer started us with. And I think there's a legal principle that basically, if we gather money from visitors, we have to spend that money on visitors, either directly or indirectly. So,
And in overarching, it needs to, this whole idea of regenerative tourism is that it's what is good for the visitor is also good for the person who lives here. So, you know, as long as those intersect, that helps from a council perspective, because we have to look at both. We have to look at our residents and what they will get out of it. And of course, tourism is an amazing industry for our community. So, you know, what is good for the visitor is automatically in some ways good for the resident, but if we want to make sure that those are overlapping or coinciding and not just
usually
because, you know,
beneficial.
some places that aren't, like I'm thinking of like Barcelona and places that there's been too many tourists and it's been overrun by
We wish.
business. So I don't know if we're in that danger of that, but I can kind of see that you.
Well, there would be if you were focusing on summer, we only want more summer, then obviously that would be terrible for people who live here. And for you guys.
And
You wouldn't see any
wouldn't
difference.
benefit
You
that.
wouldn't
So
benefit.
now you've spent $100,000 to try to increase the number of stays.
So I really like this, actually starting with the criteria piece more than and then working into policy, because I feel like this is a more tangible thing for us to discuss, because we can really see, when we are, when we are, oh shit, I just lost
I'm sorry.
It's okay, it'll come back to me in a second. Move on.
No, I'm sorry. That was
starting with criteria, you were saying?
Well, just because I feel like the strategy is sort of coming from this document pretty clearly. It's maybe in between the lines, but
There's a strategy behind it.
I understand the city's strategy pretty clearly by reading this, and I find that very helpful to evaluate. Now, I would be wary of lots of black and white criteria, pass, fail, like it must have overnight stay, not because I disagree with what you're saying, but just because just doing, looking at ROI could lead to an event that just totally trashes the downtown. And now everybody's really upset about this event that happened here.
You haven't accounted for that in the ROI. That's a cost.
Yeah.
It would be in the
Yeah. So, but I just want to make sure that like it's more of like less of a pass fail kind of thing as much as like it's weighted.
Sure.
You know, kind of.
I thought it was a rack and stack criteria that we've got 20 projects, we can only fund 3. How are we going to decide?
Mm-hmm.
So this guy gets 5 out of 10 on his ROI, but he gets 10 out of 10 on his.
And I would also when there was okay, I think that I might be on a tangent now.
Go ahead.
When we're defining like large events, it seems like that might be a little short-sighted. And maybe we want to do some large events. Maybe that's part of the strategy, and that's fine if that's what it is. But you know, if it's in the shoulder season and it gets snowed out, and then it's effed, wouldn't it be beneficial to have a bunch of, you know, seed a bunch of crazy ideas, hoping that 3 of those 10 are huge successes. Okay, so like, how do we decide if that's a good strategy versus defining we only accept events that have 5,000 people visiting? That could be really risky.
Mm-hmm. So the way a business would say that is we've got our core business, and then we've got our new business exploration. We've got our lab.
Right.
How much of our resources do we want to spend on exploration versus something that's closer to a sure thing?
Right.
I will also point out, this isn't like this mat, it's not a huge amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't be giving away $100,000 a pop, or it's gone. Yeah,
We can't.
in 3 events.
Sorry, Jennifer, could you repeat that?
Sorry, it's not a huge pot of money, so we can't be giving away 3 $100,000 awards. And as you point out, you know, we get a snowstorm, there's a wind thing, and so all that money is kind of lost. I think some of them have a balance of, we do, you know, 2 marquee events a year, and this is what that amount is, and then the rest is smaller. And we know in this community, if you look at someone like Here for Now, that's someone that started out in our backyard with like nothing, and has now really got a toehold. And I think all of us would agree those are the kind of projects we love to see and be a part of at the beginning that could then grow.
I think that's a great example of the learning lab, right? Let's take a little bit of the money. And I think we should be careful about if it's a big sum of money or not, because it depends where you're coming from. Because some folks in town would say $300,000 could fix a lot of homelessness or drug addiction or whatever. But that's clearly not permissible uses under that. But I think we got to be careful not to sound too posh. I think that might lose some folks, but I think your bigger point is a really good one.
Keeping the focus on like a combination of visitor and resident, I think will help to temper that risk. Because I think, you know, one of the
the fabulous conversation, but if we don't capture the spirit of that idea in the document that we hand back, when's that conversation going to happen? Are you going to do a one-off in council, or so? I think our duty is to provide a framework for evaluating how we spend that.
So I just wanted to respond to an idea that you had earlier about the return on investment and whatnot. And you posed a pointed question that I think is actually legitimately impossible to answer yes or no, coming from someone who's been involved with building infrastructure, I've seen examples where infrastructure did have a huge ROI, but it was really hard to measure that. Like it isn't like an event where you can see revenue very clearly that year. So you build a park, and in that building of that park, you also build in someone that is activating all these community groups, and suddenly you have programs happening in this park every single weekend of the entire year. That's a big, exciting thing, but how do you measure that? And your investment,
But I think that's a really cool example for us to be able to say there's ROI, how many guests showed up, but there's also intangible ROI that we need to take into account.
And that's, I think, what I'm getting at.
Fantastic.
I don't understand how we could build a policy for that.
To me, the point is less about what is the criteria and more about we're talking about the criteria, so that there is some discussion of measurement. I think if there's one thing that's missing from tourism activities in this town in general is a lack of measurement, a lack of proof that you're getting a return on what you spend. I'm not saying every project should be like that. If you've got a cool idea for, what could Market Square have been if there was some different criteria applied to it, including what you're talking about. What's the subjective artistic impact or town about arts? How do we at least capture that notion that we should be looking at that?
So I kind of want to bring it back a little bit to sort of looking at maybe the Niagara on the Lake example. They have like a minor street and a major street. So it kind of splits it up into like, we can have some big projects, but we can also have some smaller ones, and maybe the parameters of those can be a little different. So if we did want to go ahead and sort of move in this direction of sort of having that criteria, maybe pass-fail is a little, I don't know if that's too harsh or not, but having the criteria, but like you said, we do need some, like an overarching, does it agree with X policy or whatever, right? Like, so they've got it's mandatory alignment with at least one pillar of the corporate strategy, with at least one pillar of the tourism strategy. So could we do that here in Stratford? We do have a corporate strategy. I'm assuming that's the municipality corporate, and we do have a tourism strategy. So could we fit this type of model into the plans and strategically what we already have? But we could also tweak and add our own focus. Like those could be the overarching strategies, but then we could say, okay, but we want, these big events, the major events, to have an overnight stay criteria to it. So in addition to strategic alignment there, we would have our own, okay, this is from our policy, we also want to add this to major events. We want to make sure that it's a multi-day or whatever.
And I think to your point too, like we talked a little bit about weighting different criteria, but I think it's okay to have pass-fail on whether or not it meets a specific, so it might not meet the corporate strategic plan, but it might meet the strategy of Destination Stratford, or maybe we have that as one of the elements. And so, there may be like 6 pass-fails, and if they fail all of them, then they're out.
Yeah.
Or there could be definitely, or if they meet the overnight stay, then it's weighted heavier than if they meet the city's tourism strategy. So there's different ways you can weight.
So is that what you're looking for at the end of this process, is that we've defined that?
It wasn't necessarily what I came into this thinking, because I think I didn't really know myself where this committee was going to go and what type of feedback we would receive, and where, even when we get to the point about, seeking external engagement, what's that going to look like? That's a whole, we didn't really have any preconceived notions, to be honest. When, as a staff member, I didn't. We started to do this. We started to develop it as a sort of a starting point or launch pad, which maybe wasn't necessary because you guys had all your own ideas that you brought to the table too, but just included that draft as
And I think there's a ton of stuff in the draft that you provided that we will be able to cherry pick out. Like,
As do I think for a lot of the other materials that we got too, sorry to interrupt you.
no, it's
But,
okay.
yeah.
I'm terrible at that, so.
Okay,
but-
our clerk has something to say.
Through the chair, I did just want to clarify, so at the end of the municipal accommodation taxes ad hoc committee's term, the intent is for this ad hoc committee to make a recommendation to council on how you believe the MAT funds should be used and decisions made on their spending by council. Council will consider that recommendation. And I just, again, they can take your recommendation, they can amend it, they can go in a different route. But the intent is that at the end of this, there will be a report that will go to council, and it will say, as the MAT ad hoc committee, we believe you should focus on tourism events that generate overnight activity, and these like more broader concepts.
Thank you.
And then if there's some additional recommendations that may fall outside the policy that you want to make, we can certainly add that in for council's consideration, but they can choose to follow them or not. So just to.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Could that package that we deliver to council say, our strategy is to drive overnight guests? Our target are consumers who want to visit Stratford for more than a single day. I'm making all this up, right? The demographics and psychographics of those groups are, we suggest that there's an ongoing committee that administers this strategy and evaluates competing concepts, competing ideas that have been offered up. And here's the metrics that we think we should use. And our overarching goal is to make more MAT than we spend. Would that be a reasonable package to deliver to them?
The chair, certainly. If that's
Pardon?
certainly. So if that's what the MAT ad hoc committee wants to put forward, you could certainly add that in as part of a broader recommendation. And then ultimately it's up to council to decide whether they want to pursue that or whether they want to go into the route or whether they want to take specific parts.
So what I'd like to suggest is, I think we only have 3 meetings, right? That we use those 3 meetings to answer these strategic questions.
And Carmen, you had something to say?
No, I was just gonna say, like, just further to that, like, the ultimate package to council will include the policy. So then they can choose to adopt that policy or not. They could choose to send it back to staff to make tweaks to it. They could say, yeah, we adopt it, and then later when it comes to decision making, they could do something that's not the policy. Like, there's all, like, again, it's the intent is to try to guide this, but ultimately council has the ultimate authority over everything.
Sure.
So what this looks like and what our outputs look like, I think we're kind of maybe saying the same things, but it's kind of, it can come to council however this committee would like it to come to council.
But I also hope that whatever we send to council influences their direction, right? And so wouldn't it also be worthwhile to get council on the same strategic page that we're suggesting? As before we get to policy, what's our strategic bouncing ball that we're asking everybody to false? Then, the answer to the question, provide support, guidance, and strategic advice, is here's the strategic framework that we want to use moving forward. Our recommendation is that there's an ongoing committee to evaluate these and make recommendations back to council that we pursue X, Y, Z, but not ABC because it doesn't meet the criteria.
So maybe what you're suggesting is that we provide a recommendation and policy. That's kind of what you're thinking. Like there's an overarching recommendation about strategy. There's also a policy like that staff would prepare based on our discussions. And then you're suggesting that a third recommendation could be that the ad hoc committee be made into a committee that could possibly shepherd along the administration of said policy. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, so that's a great example where the committee ongoing, that's a task. The strategy that I would suggest is we need a rigorous measurement system to keep us on track. One of the ways we can do that is through a committee. Another way we can do that is, there's other ways, right? I happen to like that one because I think 3 meetings is very short. And we want to have lots of discussions and give different perspectives. And I think it is really dangerous to try to write a policy before you have a strategy.
Yeah. Well, I kind of feel strategy-wise, are we like close to?
Does anybody have a radically different opinion that we shouldn't be targeting overnight guests?
Anything in addition to that you think should be the strategy, like besides that?
As overarching, we have a strategy of tourism,
Yeah.
and within that, we're going to focus on overnight guests.
I
Is
would
there
say that's
anything
important.
Just ask a question, and I don't know who to direct it to because I'm not so policy is, we've got our kind of strategic direction, we have the policy. Is there anything, is that normally revisited, like in 2 years or 5 years, or can that be another recommendation from us? Is that?
Yes, it could be a recommendation from this committee that the policy be reviewed every 2 years or every term of council or every, like we try to build those types of things definitely. I don't know if it hit the draft that I had, but that's definitely a section in our policy structure.
Because I do think that, let's say tourism goes wild and now we've got $1 million a year in that pot, then we would want to
Yeah, sure.
probably maybe open up to some infrastructure, things like that. Or if the money's dwindling, that we take the larger events out. But I think having something somewhere, knowing that this is what it is today,
Responsiveness.
we're going to see in 2 years, 4 years, whatever.
I think to your point, I think you can build I can draft the policy or build the policy that will accommodate all those things
Okay.
within any period of time. Yes, I'm not suggesting we don't have to revisit it, or we shouldn't revisit it because, COVID happens, or like, there could be things that we haven't contemplated in there, but I think you can definitely stage or tier the policy such that it, if the MAT revenues exceed a certain threshold, that you'll go this kind of a different avenue, or if they fall below a certain threshold, then we won't consider projects, we'll just retain reserves.
Right.
So there's lots of ways we can build those for sure. Yep, thanks, that's a good
Jennifer,
suggestion.
if the key metric, the goal, is to make more MAT than we spend, doesn't that resolve your extreme example? So now we suddenly have $1 million of MAT to spend. We still have to make more than $1 million back. I'm not arguing that we should have flexibility, and I would offer up the idea that the strategy, whatever we want to call this committee we're proposing, is in cycle with council elections. And part of the formation of the new group is scrutinizing the strategy. Does it still hold water, or has the digital age made our horse and buggy strategies irrelevant? But I think if the goal and the metrics are sound, they should be resilient enough to respond to dramatically different market conditions.
Yeah, but I also don't think it hurts to revisit, and if we go into that with that up front, that this is something that we need to revisit in 2 years and 4 years or whatever.
No issue.
Because I would never ever want to set something in stone and then something happens that we realize that we thought this was a great breakdown, but we realize it's really not.
Part of that is if you set up the measurement system right, you've got this feedback loop that says,
Well, that's part of it too.
So, as the measuring system was up, just thinking about if our criteria was overnight stays, so we now are collecting MAT. So we have some statistics that are coming from our collection process. So do we have the data that would be able to say whether we're succeeding or not, whether we're meeting our ROIs, like looking at carbon revisiting? Maybe you're the numbers person, so like, do we have that type of information coming in?
I'm not sure if it would be to the degree that this group maybe would be thinking about it as business owners, but certainly there's something that we can probably work with to create a metric that will get us to the same conclusion.
And I feel like with Destination Stratford, they are using some measurements currently for attendance at events. So we could employ that strategy. Let's say we did a major event and we somehow could measure on said weekend we had so many people compared to last year when we didn't have this event. I
So-
think that's,
Would it be fair to say that the strategy is going to have our philosophy about measurement? We don't have to resolve what
we
the
can say
tools
that,
are.
yeah, that it's measurable.
That there's serious consideration given to measurement, allowing for some, I can't really measure this, but the serious consideration to measurement and return on investment is an integral part of the strategy. And let's decide what the measurement tools are later.
Right. Okay, well, I think if I'm hearing this correctly, we kind of have an overarching strategy of like somehow targeting overnight stays with this MAP money. We like the kind of framework that Niagara-on-the-Lake has. So, and the criteria of like the corporate strategy, the tourism strategy, and also one thing that they have in here is the CCAP, which is the Community Climate Action Plan. We have one of those. So just making sure that's, like you were saying, one of those criteria that people can hit should also be some sort of climate awareness, possibly. And in here, they don't have it as mandatory. They say it's important, but not mandatory. But, you know, just for people who are applying to have also climate lens on things is probably a good idea as well. So would we be comfortable if we let Carmen staff come back with sort of a framework based on the Niagara-on-the-Lake one? And maybe we can share with everybody those 3 strategic documents so that you can have a look and say, you know, this is what the destination Stratford want, then we want to make sure that these other things are included in our strategy, like of the policy. So the policy would be guided by those overarching strategic documents, but we would also put on top of it our own strategy to say these are the criteria that we also want to include. Does that make sense? If we, like at this point, like have we had enough discussions to feel comfortable with that? Moving forward for the next meeting that we would have, is that too much? Or is it, like if we could make a draft policy based on the Niagara-on-the-Lake one, and then provide everybody with that, plus the strategic documents?
Just as another model that we could use, if we came up with a strategic framework and then asked the team to help cherry pick from other municipalities examples of language or metrics or whatever it is, I think that's a great idea. But I don't think that we should be using languages from other places to develop the strategy in the first place. I think we should be using their language as a way to pay off the strategies we've developed ourselves.
I think based on what Jody just summarized from the, like if we attach to existing strategies that we already have, or that even, that maybe aren't even as formalized, but we want to include like the overnight stays, for example, that like we can, I think I can tweak the language in the Niagara-on-the-Lake example so that it's married to our strategic plans and our objectives. So it's like, because I appreciate what you're saying, like the language in the Niagara-on-the-Lake's criteria is not doesn't feel like Stratford. It doesn't feel like our things that we already do or that we.
You can change the conceptual and the tonality.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think, going back to the earlier point, I don't know how you formalize this idea, but I think what we owe council is a strategic framework for how to spend that. And here's the policy that brings it to life. I don't think that we should jump to what's Niagara-on-the-Lake doing, because then all we're going to do is end up arguing about tactics, as opposed to, do we agree that this is our target? Do we agree that these are the strategies we're going to use? This is off the table. Here's how we interact with Destination Stratford. That's the kind of guideline that I think we owe council, as opposed to cutting and pasting from other municipalities. Exactly. Nobody said to do that.
So I'm not as familiar with the Niagara-on-the-Lake one as the draft policy that was provided, that staff already provided us. So like they had The draft one has those 6 areas of focus. And I don't know if Niagara Lake has a similar focus, and is that something strategically we want to discuss?
So the documents provided in here for Niagara on the Lake exclude their policy.
Right.
This is their
Yeah, that's what I thought.
supporting documents
Yeah.
package, right? So I can get my hands on it. I'm quite familiar with Kyle Freeborn, the treasurer there, so he and I have presented at conferences together. So I can get that information from them to just so that these documents that we have in front of us have some more context,
Right.
and then that way we can talk about it again the next
Because I
day.
think, like you're saying, I do think we need to have a strategic discussion based on like what type of events, or does this, does it make sense to have tourism product development or not? Like some of those sort of criteria, well, not criteria, but more overarching, like strategic, do we invest in the park system? Do we, some of those questions probably are more for our discussion as well. So if we can kind of frame that policy area of, that to be open for discussion and not necessarily that just copy and paste from somebody else. But these are the criteria that Niagara Lake uses. This is the one that Guelph uses or whatever. There are a few instances where Guelph is still in there. So, if we take some of these focuses and we say, we don't want that about like wayfinding, like X, like we could do that as a committee. So we don't recommend that, and what we narrow down on with the overarching thought of overnight stays, does it make sense to invest in wayfinding? And we can have that discussion, but I think we maybe need to all go back and sort of have a little think about, like once we get that information to sort of parse out what is important, what is going to be the best, so that we can have those criteria that we're going to crunch. So all those projects will come through that set of criteria. But you're right, like the overarching, like does this type of project fit with that strategy that we have?
I think there's the step in between, right? So there's what's our lofty goal, which is great, and we're going to hand over this kind of box to council. But there's also a number of legal, judicial, and our own Stratford language that need to be defined really carefully, I think. And that's part of the strategy. Before we get to policy, it's what role does this weird concept of evaporation play in our strategic plan and how we spend money? What does the decision in Niagara Falls in 2025, where the court says you have to have a strategy, how does that impact what we do, and how often do we revisit the strategy? There's some concrete constraints out there that I think should be part of our consideration.
So I guess moving forward, does it make sense to go back and kind of write up what the staff believes is from our discussion is our sort of overarching strategy, and then have that middle piece discussion of like that structure of the strategy? Does that make sense? And then also underneath it, then we have the criteria.
Would it be, in the spirit of brainstorming, worthwhile to generate a list of questions that we think should be contemplated in the strategy?
Possibly.
Is that the list that you have on this thing? So yeah, we can talk about those, I think.
Yes.
I think what I put there was meant to be examples, but I did this for 25 years. I've got a list of thought-provoking questions that I'm happy to circulate, and this group could say, no, that doesn't apply to us, or yeah, it's worth it. Is
So
that
are we
okay?
talking about the how section of this?
Yeah, I'm
Answering
talking
those
about
questions?
some questions. Is the document that I have not handed out, I'll just email it, that's
Right.
allowed. But it says, what's the box? What's our strategy for spending that funds? What are we selling? Who are we selling it to? What's our desired outcome? What's our plan to deliver on that? And how do we prove it? What metrics do we have? and there's a whole bunch of examples. But I think we need to be able to answer those, and I'll answer them the same way.
I guess it makes sense in one way. In another way, because it's public money, it doesn't, you know, like the idea of product is a little bit different, I guess. But it makes sense to have a series of questions that we go through and answer, which will define what our priorities are.
You're spending money to try to change behavior. That sounds like you're pitching a product.
Yeah. It's, I
We
mean, I
can
guess
call- we can call-
Stratford is the product, I suppose, but.
Yeah, well, it could be a jazz festival, or it could be parkland. To me, we can call it the Stratford experience. But what is included and not included in the Stratford experience needs to be defined.
And that's fair. And we can also look at Destination Stratford's strategic plan just to see is this an overlap, or are we reinventing the wheel, or we should probably be augmenting the wheel, because the wheel probably doesn't cover everything. So, you know, we want to make sure that we check in with that and that it sort of fits hand in glove.
So the bias that I have, and I think maybe others in the room have, is that there is little to no emphasis on overnight stays in Destination Stratford wheelhouse. The fundamental flaw is that the people who are gathering the money and the consumers who are paying the money are not getting the benefit of that money. There's a rule that says, I don't even know what the rule is. Stewardship.
But I don't think that we're saying this, or that's what I'm hearing, is that this couldn't be specifically for Matt in alignment with the strategy of Destination Stratford. Like you could, as we were saying before, be complementary. We could say, like, it has to be both things. It has to be in alignment with strategy and do Matt. Like, I don't think anybody's saying that, like, that we can't look at the Destination Strategy for sure, Stratford, right? So why can't we do both?
Because the first question I would ask is the strategy that Destination Stratford is pursuing the same as ours? For that particular project, are they trying to drive overnight guests?
I don't think it has to be the same. I think you can, like, you can have, only choose the thing that, where there's a Venn diagram where they overlap. And those are the only things that win the money. You know, and I'd like to, I don't see how that couldn't be the solution that you're proposing.
I like the idea of the Venn diagram,
Because like there's a whole bunch of stuff that could be really in conflict with Destination Stratford. It would really be a bummer to have award money there, and vice versa. This money should be spent for things that so contribute to Matt. So let's like look at this as the Venn diagram.
For sure. So just take an example of for test bit in your model. Destination Stratford spends a fair amount of money on their trails, right? Their Bacon and Ale Trail and the Maple Trail. There are all these trails, Chocolate Trail. Should we spend money on that?
That wouldn't align with our strategy. Right?
Perfect.
Yeah. So
then we're in agreement.
Yeah.
Whatever we spend money on needs to be in line with our strategy. Whether it's
yes, but Destination Stratford would say the same thing. It needs to be aligned with our strategy. And so it's a yes.
Yeah, perfect.
And just sort of further to that, I think like you put the trails, the Bacon and Ale, whatever. Like if there became a situation where those types of initiatives explicitly did generate overnight sales, like they were multi-day things, or there was some way to track. I know they have the passport systems for some of those things, but maybe if there was some way to sort of confirm or know that somebody was here for 3 days straight in order to do that, then I think then you might change your mind. You might say that it's compatible or whatever. So
to me, it's less a concern about where the idea comes from, and more is spending on that idea serving our goal of generating more math. I don't think the Bacon and Ale Trail generates a penny of math, and we spent a ton of math to drive it. That doesn't seem right.
Sure, but if people who are staying in accommodations do that activity,
prove it.
It's sure. Yeah, you can have that.
Do you really believe that people are adding an overnight stay to go try a bunch of chocolate?
does one have to drive the other, or can it be an outcome of the other? So
I think overnight stays are driving the trails. The trails are not driving any overnight stays.
Okay, so that brings me to the other thing that I don't think we should lose was earlier we were talking about recommendations of who's deciding what is the score on all this stuff. And I'd like to make sure that we don't lose that as part of our recommendation either. It's like because that also adds transparency both for the businesses and for the community. That we're saying we want numbers to look at the end, but at the beginning we want this collection of people making decisions and scoring and saying
To me,
approving.
could we not use not necessarily these bodies for this number, but could you not say the constituent group needs to be represented?
Yeah, exactly.
Business,
Right.
accommodation,
Exactly.
citizenry.
I mean, this is a very well thought
Yeah.
cross section.
Okay, do we have a way forward? I'm looking at Carmen especially, like, for our next meeting, do we have, is it kind of clear maybe what we can bring to the next meeting as far as this, for discussion? Do we want to, obviously we have these 6 areas, maybe we look at the Niagara Falls one, we bring it together like from a few different like possible focuses that, does that make sense?
yeah, I think so. Like I think there's.
I can work with you on that.
Sure. I think based on the conversation, like I would probably, so for example, on the draft policy shell, I'll call it a report document, you know, we can add like we've got a policy statement, we've got a purpose, but we can add a strategic considerations section that then ties into all the things we've talked about, and then some of the things we've talked about, and then the other, I'll say like strategic plans and priorities that have been identified by council. So again, I think those are really good ideas, and I do appreciate your comments about you know, building the strategy before you build the criteria. So I think we've kind of landed on a couple of ideas. We can certainly continue to revise it as we talk about it and build on that, and then from there, you know, even just kind of. I'll kind of what I would say not scrap, but like sort of talk about the scope of the policy in more of the Niagara on the Lake framework. And then that way, like, you know, and again, I wasn't married to this or stuck on this. It was really just an idea from a compilation of various things. And then we can, you know, and try to, like, in addition to sort of looking at the Niagara Lake policy pieces, then start to look at how would we use criteria. I think one of the missing pieces, or the things we haven't really talked about yet, is whether we have $50,000, $300,000, or $1 million, or whatever that number is to kind of I'll play with each year. The overarching sort of, I'll read just for the benefit of this group, like there's already the reserve fund policies in place for the MAT revenues to maintain a minimum threshold, just so that we're not blowing our brains out and then having that $50,000 a year with nothing to do. So just kind of so that sort of contextual for this as well. But I think it's also just talking about so whether we have like I said, $1 or $300,000 or however much annually, that we can talk about the annual revenues in the context of how much do we give away as a maximum. And what, like, you know, maybe there's no projects that come to us in a year, and what do we do if that happens? Or if we get, like you said, 10 applications or 10 ideas and only, we only have money for 3. So what, like, just refining some of that, and that's language and structure that I can put into the policy document for sure.
I just think it's really interesting, like, as soon as we agreed on, at least, I don't know if we can say we agreed, but at least when there seemed to be alignment forming that this is about overnight stays, it feels like a number of other questions started to fall into place. And to me, that's the beauty of strategic planning. That you're up here and you're saying, okay, well, who is our target? What's our experience product, whatever you want to call it? If we agree on all those things, then by the time you get to evaluating a project, you're not arguing over, I like pink, I like blue. You're arguing over, it doesn't pay off this plank or pillar of our strategic plan.
or it's less of an ROI
Which
than
is part of the
another.
strategic.
And so I think that I like the idea of weighting certain criteria in our criteria piece, so that we might have a project that presents itself that it does not generate overnight stays, but hits a bunch of other criteria, or it does a bunch of other things that we like, or that will meet other types of things. So then you're not necessarily excluding that project, but it's going to be harder for that project to get into the top.
What kind of project would that be?
Well, like say a day tripping thing. Okay, it might not generate or the butter chart trail or whatever. It might not generate an overnight stay, but it may tick a box, for example, with or it may allow us to apply for more money to do a different thing because we can leverage that, or it might meet an objective that's outlined in the tourism and cultural plan that council's already identified as a strategic priority.
So this is I don't know the rules well enough, but from the research I was trying to do, I got the impression that if you collect MAT, you need to spend MAT against the people, the type of consumer who contributed the MAT. That it's not a pool tax, it's a user fee.
I think it's just tourism generally.
I'm talking about MAT, the legal definition of MAT from the provincial regs.
So there's a requirement to spend it on tourism-related initiatives. That's the broad, quote-unquote, definition in the legislation. So what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean because it got generated from accommodators that it benefits accommodators directly.
No.
Right? So again, does it benefit the people who actually stayed there directly or indirectly?
Exactly.
Sure. So, but in the I'll call it our tourism and cultural plan, there might be things in there, for example, that wayfinding signs would be a good example. Like, do those benefit the people who stayed overnight? Possibly, because they, need to know how to get around and they need whatever. So you could be like, I think we're saying kind of the same thing, but it's just like, I think we can be a lot clearer in the policy language.
The reason I say that is because of this big deal court case in Niagara Falls last year that said there is a stewardship test that needs to be administered. And you guys are probably way more familiar with that than me. But it says basically you got to spend the money on the people who gave you the money, not accommodators, the consumers.
Yep.
So are you really saying that the Bacon and Ale Trail benefits the people who paid in that?
We could discuss that in the context of what we've talked a lot about is sales and branding, and branding leading to sales. So what if somebody came for the Bacon and Ale Trail, fell in love with the town because of the trails and the signs and everything, and decided a year later to come back and say, you know what, I can spend a weekend there. And what happened, and then next week they're going to spend a full week, and maybe they move to town or open business rates. So that branding is pretty hard to measure in the context of where you spend money.
I think that's another great example or illustration of we want to be mindful of metrics and return on investment, but there's some things that we just have to, on faith and on judgment and on experience, say we believe it has positive branding impact. I'm not averse to that, but just let's be conscious and explicit in saying we can't measure this.
Yeah, and that should fall within the constructs of the strategic plan for our tourism for that the city has, and that tour destination Stratford has. It might not, and if there is that Venn diagram, there's three of them, it might not necessarily fall completely into the overnight stay specifically.
Right.
But and I think that's what you're
Yeah,
talking
that's what I was
about.
trying to say,
Yeah,
yeah.
those, if we can boil it down and not completely reinvent the wheel, but boil it down and say, you know what, there is an overnight stay pillar in this strategy.
Even if it's a long-term play together.
Yeah,
got it.
And I think to that too, like when you're talking about the weighting, right? Like I'll use the Venn diagram example. That overnight stay might have it might require a bigger piece of that pie to get the weighting to be like something that fits the guidelines better than a day trip thing.
Can I ask a dumb question? Do we have a lawyer on staff?
No.
So is it possible, I don't know where this exists, but there's all these regulations and law, court decisions, as well as our own statements. And I see people nodding and shaking their head or disagreeing. Is the Niagara Falls decision informing our direction?
No, I didn't even know about it.
No,
It's a big deal.
So through the chair, if I could, so this ad hoc committee will make a recommendation. As part of staff's due diligence, we would then take that policy or that recommendation, provide it to our city solicitors contracted, and obtain additional advice that we would then provide to council. So again, there is that portion that we will do, but we need to give something to the lawyer in order for them to write context. Also for a 2025 court case, there may be additional things that come out later that we don't know yet.
Which
that
goes
may
back to
impact the
Jennifer's
community
point.
test. Yeah. So again, this committee, we've been tasked by council to make a recommendation. We're going to do that, and then as staff, we'll complete our due diligence with our lawyer, our insurer, whoever else we need to contact or engage, and make sure that what you are recommending is permissible, and if it's not, we'll have that conversation.
Yeah, but there's things in the draft that we received that are not allowed.
So through the chair again, and I think this was said on numerous occasions, the draft was simply a draft.
Yep.
It was started well over a year ago. Work on it ceased once a decision was made to form an ad hoc committee. It was provided just for information. So again, this is part of this review that this ad hoc committee is now going to do. If there are specific questions that members have, please send them to Vicki. She can then get them to me, and I can review them with the chair, the director, and then additional parties as necessary.
I'm sorry, I'm not making myself clear. How do you make a strategy without knowing where the lines are that you can't cross?
So again, through the chair, court case has just come out. We need to understand what the ad hoc committee is thinking, and then we can take this information and provide it to our city solicitor, who can review the court case and provide additional recommendations to us. At this time, providing this case, I don't know would be as helpful. I'd like to understand the thought process of this ad hoc committee. We already have a really great start from today's meeting. I think we have a really great direction for the next meeting, that again, we can take all this information and keep working through the process.
And I think with the court case, like, I don't know the specifics of it, but I would imagine maybe there were some projects that were accepted or proposed that were sort of on the line. So we're trying to keep, like, by looking at the Destination Stratford tourism strategy and all of that, like to make sure we're within those confines and not out in left field somewhere. So yeah, and I think that review after the fact too, just to, you know, make sure that there's, I don't think that there'll be anything recommended going forward that would be well outside what would be legally allowed, so that we wouldn't be wasting our time.
That's exactly what I'm driving at, is we're wasting our time if we don't understand their problems.
Right. But again, like, because it's such a broad legislation from the province, then it's like, how do you know you're on the offside? Because they don't provide you any enough structure to know what's on side.
It's very big, I hear you.
Yeah.
So, and with respect to the legality of it, policy, like we already have a MAT policy that's been passed, that drives, that we are allowed to charge it, we are allowed to collect it, like what the parameters of that is. I think that was the court case that was challenged, not the administration of and dissemination of the funds. So I think that's where, but I could be wrong.
What I read about the Niagara case is it was brought to suit because they wanted to change the structure from a percentage to a dollar charge, depending on the different.
Yep. So that's a little different than what we're looking at in the policy spending.
No, it's not, because the judgment, the decision from the court outlined very specific litmus tests that we need to use to say whether that was not the original question of the lawsuit, but it's part of the decision, that there are these 3 litmus tests. And I think we need to know what those are. Otherwise, we are wasting our time and sending something that violates the litmus test, and then the lawyers can say, you can't do that.
Well, at the next meeting, then we can figure out what those lists
Fantastic.
tests are.
Yeah. Well,
And,
I can bring that back.
Yeah, so that we can also discuss that too.
Great.
Okay, so I think we've talked this through as far as we can, perhaps, and then we'll gather the information together, we'll bring it back to the next meeting and have a further discussion about how we can define this.
Would you outline what conversations are allowed to happen here? Is it, you can't say anything unless it's in this venue, or we can email each other and there's no problem? What are the rules?
We can provide guidance.
Great.
I don't think there's a lot of parameters. Obviously, you can't make a decision amongst yourselves without being here, but I mean, I think sharing information is not a problem.
The only thing that we want to be mindful of is that all the discussion and decision-making needs to be happening in open session. So I will provide you with advice in relation to the open meeting requirements provided by the Ombudsman and set out some clear examples. So for example, you don't want to send a policy to the whole committee and then all of a sudden people start responding, that's a great idea, we should do that, because that's advancing the business of the committee. So I will gather some information and share it with members, and then that way you can ask us if you have any questions. We want to make sure it's clear and that we're conducting business in open session.
We only have 3 meetings and it's once a month. It feels like, how can we keep this moving? Drop somebody an email and say, do you think this makes sense for our target?
Or you can just put it out there, say, we can discuss this at the
Yeah,
next meeting.
perfect.
Here's my information.
Perfect.
And
Love that.
that works that way. And I would
Add that to Vicky,
Again,
send that to Vicky rather than it be a circulation that everybody's gonna comment on or.
Through the chair, for anything that a member would like to discuss at a meeting, please send it to Vicky. It'll be consolidated and then included with the agenda as an item for discussion. This way, all members know what's to be
And
discussed,
also the public.
and the public as well.
And what information that we're gathering in order to have a discussion.
I have no problem copying whoever you'd like, but I'm going to copy these guys.
Or you can send it to Vicky, she can send it to everybody.
That's fine, but what I don't want to have happen is it gets sent in, and no disrespect, there's a ton of other stuff going on, and it doesn't get sent out until it becomes the agenda a month from now. And we've lost a month of iterative process to make some, to develop some ideas that have been bantered around.
So through the chair, I would just say we want to just make sure the process is being followed appropriately. So again, my recommendation is that members, if you have information you want to share it specifically with Vicky, and then we can disseminate that in the most appropriate manner, given the open meeting requirements that we have to follow along with our procedural bylaw and whatnot.
And maybe I'll ask Vicky to share some of those documents we talked about, like the destination Stratford strategic, like some of those, like so we have them tomorrow, because then those will take some time to look over. So some of those ones we've already identified would be great to have in advance.
So I love the idea of guidance for me, that's great. Can I make the request that the guidance enables nimbleness and speed of communication?
So again, this committee is an ad hoc committee of council. We are subject to the open meeting rules. So this committee won't be able to, in an email, say, hey, I think we should all go down this path and this is a decision we're going to make. If there's information to be shared, please share it with our council committee coordinator. We can then work and share information with the committee. And then we can work towards setting up our meetings and ensuring our agendas are fulsome and not only members of the committee know what's going to be discussed, but also members of the public have an idea of those broad topics.
Fantastic.
Did you have something?
No, I was just going to ask if we could get those 3 reports kind of sooner rather than later. And I was initially going to ask if they're available online, but then I had concerns that maybe one of us is looking at an outdated document. So if we could get those sent to us so we all know we're looking at the same, that was
Yeah, so that'll be this council strategic priorities, the destination Stratford strategy, and the seed cap
And sports tourism.
and sports tourism.
And
We're making some
I don't think it was sports tourism. I think it was the
Was it a
community, the
Community
climate
climate
action.
action plan.
Sorry, so through the
So
chair, we're going to look through all of our plans and
Okay.
policies, and we may send additional ones for your information if
Okay.
you'd like to review them.
But then if
Certainly
we
the ones
decide not to
identified.
include them in our thing, we can do that.
Yeah, you can say, oh, this not.
I think there's language there or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. Okay, we have a way forward. Awesome. All right, so the next item was the public engagement activities. And a little background for this, and actually Councilor McQueen was here, he's gone. So during the council meeting, Larry was talking about the fact that it would be great to have, some more input from the public, from outside of this committee, but to sort of get a broader general opinion. So again, this is sort of, I think, a very quick draft of possible way that we could reach out to Engage Stratford to ask some questions of folks and, what do we need, what kind of information, how do we want to engage with people. So I'm going to ask the committee, are there any sort of general comments on what was given as far as a possible what do you call it? Survey. That's the word I'm looking for. Any general thoughts, or if not, I'll
No.
delegation.
No.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to ask the committee first if there's general thoughts.
Does anybody else want to go? Because I think this is a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Okay.
And it is not ready for distribution for few reasons. One, the market research technicalities to it are flawed, right? There's leading questions, there's double-barreled questions, there's commingling of different targets in the same question flow. There are a lot of serious flaws to the structure that will screw up the results. And then we'll have results that people are quoting that it's just wrong. Secondly, there are questions and options in the question paper that don't comply with the rules. We can't offer up fixing roads. Would you like to spend MAP money on fixing roads? Or would you like to use the MAP money to decrease property taxes? We're not allowed to do that. So there should not be illegal or not appropriate options being provided. Third, and most important, you can't survey until you know what the strategy is. We're not on a fishing expedition with this. We are on a fishing expedition with the survey, and that's not an appropriate use of the survey.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
So, what's the resolution on that?
So I actually need a motion from one of you that we would hear Barb and her comments on this is just a draft, so we're discussing it. So we're going to hear what Barb has to say, and then we'll...
Oh, Barb's talking about the survey.
So
I will make the motion to hear Barb Shaughnessy.
Yay!
Okay, and the committee, do we all agree?
We don't have to
Oh, yes? Okay, go ahead.
Correct. Barb Shaughnessy. Today, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Innkeepers Collective. I'm an accommodator who actually pays MAP. I'm very familiar with municipal and political processes, as I was an elected official for the Region of Peel, Town of Caledon, making decisions for 1.3 million people. As a community advocate, I research, identify problems, and find solutions that work. I poured over numerous documents from different communities looking at everything MAP, and have been advocating for this on our committee since January of 2023. I'd like this committee to keep in mind that tourism is fragile in Stratford, and it's probably the most important economic driver within the city core. Our U.S. guest numbers were down last year. Our guests had friends in the States trying to deter them from coming to Canada and to Stratford. They were worried about what we would think. And actually, some guests actually canceled their reservations and decided not to come, all because of Trump. The Trump threat has gone up. And I haven't seen any municipal, provincial, or federal government actively trying to encourage supporting Canada as they did last year. Thank goodness for our Canadian people who came out and supported us, which propped up the numbers. So why does this matter when we start talking about U.S. visitors? It's important because they do longer stays and they spend more money. So speaking to I said in my request that I would speak to the survey, so I've gone in depth through that. The survey provided to you does not reflect Councillor McCabe's motion, which was supported unanimously at Council, nor the September 8th report to Council, which was also endorsed. This is not should be the work of the committee, and it is not. Larry's motion was very specific with who should be consulted. He says the broader tourism sector affected by MAP was his first qualification, including but not limited to accommodators, food and beverage operators, arts and culture, attractions, and retail businesses. It does not say send it out to tourists. It does not say to send it out to the general business within the city of Stratford. Second part of his motion was also very clear. He says second part of his motion does not say do work ahead of the committee meeting. Larry wanted the consultation in his motion, which I have here, if anybody wants to see it. Larry wanted the consultation to be considered in your recommendations in the final report to Council. The only way you can do that is do the work, and then a report will go to Council. So what do we do? This survey, in my opinion, is premature and actually trying to direct the ad-hoc in a direction that you may not take. Why would you ask the public for comments that probably won't be in your policy? You need to do your preliminary work first, then provide it to Larry's list with comments, as he asked for, then review and make adjustments, or maybe expand your recommendations from the feedback that you get. So the September 8th, 2025 report, approved by Council, page 1, paragraph 2, says, was going to send out, as Mrs. Kruger said, was going to send out the draft policy attached to solicit stakeholder suggestions, and it was paused, they said, till they received feedback from the ad-hoc committee, which is you. You have no feedback at this time. Proceeding with the survey recommendation does not conform and actually violates, in my opinion, both the September 8th report and Mr. McCabe's motion. I take exception as a councillor, when you go to the effort, write up an in-depth motion, have council approve it, we should abide by that. So a survey, and in my also opinion, I find surveys to be the least effective way to communicate. So question 1 of the survey, I'm not going to read it all off, I think you guys all have read it. Once again, I'm telling you it doesn't conform to Mr. McCabe's motion. Question 3, it says, I believe the city should spend 50% portion of the MAP funds on, and then lists like 4 different items, only one which is tourism. The city's report and draft does not make any mention of the items listed in question 3, except tourism. So, Madam Chair or staff, as the city moves on, can you explain, and I leave this to the end because I think we need to know how the survey was created and who provided that input to those questions. All very fair. I do support creating an evaluation criteria to guiding funding, as you have seen in the Niagara Lake policy. The Innkeepers Collective are actually the ones who found the first one, and maybe we need to provide that because it was a part A and a part B. What is in your documents is actually part B. There was a part A, but I was also going to ask Mrs. Kruger to get the policy, which I couldn't actually find in Norfolk Gen on their site. So, but that's already happening, so that's great. So the reason why you want that evaluation criteria is because it's accountable and transparent and allows you to evaluate how that money was spent. What I don't agree with is the wording, and I'm being sticky here, is the funding decisions by council. Council makes the overall decision, but it's making assumptions that council is going to oversee how and who gets the money. They should be endorsing, hopefully if you do a really great job, they should be endorsing your process and your protocols. I totally disagree with flexibility for council to make funding decisions on the use of money. That would be a waste of this ad hoc committee's time, and let's face it, council makes political decisions. With strong evaluation criteria, there should be no question, unless this committee makes exceptions, through a future review process in their final policy, which we actually started to discuss, which is a key way, because this is a brand new policy and we're not really quite sure how it's going to roll out and how effective it's going to be and how many people are going to start knocking on the door for some money. So, but at the same time, just remember, council is political and you as a committee are not. So grants is a good process. They already do it with their community grants. So it's a form that I believe would be supportable under the process that you have started now. In the report it says we were in a rush. There is no rush. Even if the report said so. I delegated counsel on this very subject, put on the record that if you needed extra time, that you have the ability to do so. So please, this is really important to tourism and accommodators to take your time and get it done right. My suggestion to this committee is to do the preliminary work, as per September 8th report says, provide the tourism industry stakeholders, possibly through, my suggestion, through the BIA or Destination Stratford, then have an open house where you invite them, the people from Councilor McCain's, you invite them to come and see your work. That's the best way to actually get public input. Then, once you have had the open house, you take that feedback back to the main ad hoc group, and you look, and what he says, he wanted the key themes heard and how those views were considered informing your recommendations. So if we follow his motion, which I, as an elected official, thinks it's the #1 item that we have to do, and a staff report that actually said something similar, we need to do it. So yes, survey far too premature, and I would personally like, and I'm sure the group would personally like to know who came up with questions, because as one committee member has already said, some of the things might not be from a legal perspective. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer anything that you may ask.
Any questions from the committee?
I must have done a good job then.
There you go.
And then
roll us over.
And Madam Chair, if you could let the committee know who formulated those questions and how they came about, I think the committee, because my concern is if that had gone out, then the ad hoc committee would have been responsible and be seen as the people who generated it, and I know they didn't generate. So
well, that's why we brought it here to the committee. So
perfect.
We're talking about it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for putting your names forward to be on this committee. It's really important to have a broad range of perspectives in anything we do. So thank you.
Okay.
Carmen, not in direct response to that, but I'll just comment on the fact that the survey questions, like every single piece of paper in this package, were for discussion.
Yeah.
So there was no intent to issue anything like that. So yeah, it was just there as a bit of a guide oh, I don't like that, or oh, that triggers another question to, oh, we should ask about this. So it was really just there as a conversation starter.
Right.
So it's not going anywhere right now.
No.
Just to hear,
Yeah,
this is
okay.
where it stops. So,
I think that was the part that was maybe missing.
yeah. Yeah, so this is for you to consider, and there are obviously some pieces to consider, because I had forgotten from Councilor McCabe's motion that it wasn't necessarily for the general public to comment, because I was thinking when I read the survey, I was like, wow, we're probably going to need to give a lot of background for the general public to understand what we're asking, what these questions are. So with that in mind, it does kind of make sense to delay the feedback process till we have a bit more information from the committee. That makes sense, I think. So, yeah, I would think we could definitely have a stakeholder distributed survey, possibly an open house. I think we have to talk about that with staff to see about resources and timing for that. I'd be open to that for sure, to have a session where we do our work first and then we provide it to people in the industry to say, okay, what do you think? Is there anything we missed? That kind of stuff. So that totally makes sense to me.
I do, so I don't know, with surveys, are the responses, like if you do them online, are the responses normally anonymous? Yes?
Typically,
Okay.
yes. So we have the Engage Stratford platform
Right.
that we
Yeah,
use. We use it for budget services.
And can that platform, like, could we do that targeted, or is that a public platform that anyone has access to?
It is a public platform.
Okay.
However, we could maybe add a question in there or some filtering sort of thing to say that if you're not part of these groups, don't fill it out.
And is there,
That's what I mean. We could have that first question
Right.
to describe yourself with all the criteria, but we can also say, are you a visitor tourist? That those survey answers could get slotted in another direction, right?
so is there something that says that the city has to use that, or could we do like a paper?
We could do a paper one. I think the reason why that's the preferred method for the city's distribution is that it is open, fair, and transparent, regardless of the target.
Okay.
So that's part of it, but it also summarizes things like in a format that's easy to understand, and it does have some advantages for it. It doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it, but it's also less, I'll say, labor intensive than manually collating paper and trying to figure out, okay, how many people said yes and how many people like that.
So then maybe having a preamble and realistically we weed out the ones. But I do think, and again, I come at this, you know, I do have a restaurant, but I'm primarily as an accommodator. I do think it's important to have a question that identifies what, and they can lie, but I'm hoping they won't, because answers to me or feedback that's coming from accommodators, I'm going to read everything, but I will weight the responses from accommodators a little bit more, because again, they're the ones that are generating this.
And
so that's the one
question.
question.
From what I remember from our surveys for the budget, that council was generated like all the responses, so you could sort of see, you know, which box they checked.
Right.
Like as far as their identifiers go, not their names and stuff, but just, you know, like that. So, you know, we could, when we get the feedback, we could see, you know, oh, this person wants a restaurant, or this, you know, or this person is a visitor, or so that can be generated that way. And we can also, even though it's a public platform and anybody could go on it, I don't think we have a lot of people who are like just
gaming the system,
fill out surveys, and we would just send those links to the appropriate groups and say, this is a survey for you. Like we have some strategies, I know you see it. We won't advertise it on Facebook and tell all the public to please fill this out.
So I did market research at big companies for 25 years. I think the idea of getting people to self-identify what demographic, psychographic, business group, whatever, makes a ton of sense. But if you do that, then the flow of questions needs to be customized for what they are. You can't ask a tourist, do you want to get the road repaired? You can't even ask anybody about the road repair if it's not illegal. But if we're going to cast this net real broad, the questions need to be tailored to the segment that you're talking about.
Can you do that?
You can't commingle.
Can you do it on that? So I know you can do it on certain platforms where you stream that person, they go to a different page, like they click on visitors and then it pops them onto a different page with a different set of questions, but yeah, I don't know if we can.
It's called a branching survey.
It doesn't work that way for the Engage Stratford platform. No.
The other thing we could do is just basic, not discount them, but just sort of being like, okay, well, you know, we can, in our statistics, we can sort of set that aside.
And what's the sample size you typically get?
Yeah, it's not
Depends
very
on
good.
the survey.
Yeah.
It really depends. Anywhere from 5 to 500.
We've had over 1,000 on, when we asked about garbage. We asked people love to talk about
Parking got a good result too.
Yeah.
The reason I bring it up is if your sample size is this big and now you break it down into all these different buckets, your sample size is going to get divided.
I think we would, I don't know if I would necessarily I would take everybody listed in that motion as one, and everybody else as others. So in other words,
there is
lump together all anybody
A
truly
stakeholder.
stakeholders and those other people who fill out the survey, right? And this divided into two. You don't have to, but for like Jennifer was saying, she's reading it, the feedback. She's going to be interested in who's
Survey
writing
demos.
that type of feedback. So.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, so I think as far as the survey goes, maybe we should just set that aside for now, get the meat of the policy and stuff that we're going to work on together first, and then come to the survey after that. And they're going to be fairly general questions, I think.
Can I just float this concept that a survey is meant to be an aid to judgment, right? And what I mean by that is we come up with the ideas and then the stakeholders react to it and validate it or invalidate it. This is not a fishing expedition to go say, what do you want us to do?
Yeah, it's going to be more specific than that to say, okay, this is, you know, we've gone the big grant thing, and we've got, like, so, you know, this is sort of the criteria. Do you like this or not? Kind of like, are you happy with this focus, or, you know, so we can ask questions that are not leading people in a different direction.
Good.
So, and I mean, I think, depending on the time we have, we can probably come up together, rather than leaving staff to do it, we can come up with questions together.
I think that's part of our due diligence is we created this strategy and policy and here's how we validate it.
Yeah. I don't see a problem with that. I think, you know, our goal is to probably have a nice, short and sweet, get to the point kind of survey, so it's not going to take us too long, I think, to hammer that out. So.
All the analysis I've seen about correlations of answers and everything else, there's always one question that contributes like 80% of the wisdom and conclusions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like I think part of the motion was also to have to be able to have comments.
Yep.
People
Open-ended.
write their thoughts.
Yep.
Okay, so that's public engagement activities. So that's the survey and possibly an open house.
I think we should have both those ideas to come back to.
Yeah. I like the idea of open houses. We always get enthusiastic about our budget open houses, and then once people show up. Thank you for those of you who do. Thank you for coming and being interested.
It's the Lonely Hearts Club.
We want people to come and talk to us. We do. But maybe then we'll have to think about a place where, I mean, I think hopefully downtown BIA folks would be comfortable coming to City Hall and going to the auditorium.
Seems only fair to do it at Pottsville.
Yeah, that's true. There might be pecuniary interest
For free.
somewhere.
Yeah.
That would be great. Okay, so I think we're done. Spent a couple hours. Thank you for all of your time.
5:10 is pretty good.
Next meeting, do we have to discuss the next meeting? Or, so what is it? It's not on these.
So through the chair, as noted on the agenda, we put that committee meetings could be held on Tuesday, February 17th, because the 16th is family day, so it's a holiday, we're closed. Monday, March 16th, or Monday, April 20th. Right now, terms of reference do say that the committee will meet 3 times, so we'd be looking to schedule 2 meetings if we can determine those, or we can determine one, like when the next meeting date will be, and then keep discussing it as we go along.
And we're not allowed to exceed the 3.
So right now, no. If the committee's unable to fulfill its mandate, then as staff, we would need to go back to council and get permission to extend the date. And currently, your term limit ends April 30th, 2026.
Okay. That's a deadline. Okay, so if we can approve 2 of these, or all of them? 2 of them?
2 of them.
Okay.
Wait,
So what do you
is
think?
this in the document,
Yes.
these dates? Okay, copy, maybe we can.
Yeah, so Tuesday, February 17th
Okay.
Oh, it's on the agenda.
would be the next meeting, so that's approximately a month.
Yep.
So does that work for everybody to do the Tuesday and then March? That way, if we did do February, March, and our term ends at the end of April, then if we did need another meeting, we could still fit another meeting without having to extend our.
I wouldn't mind proposing a different date for March, given that that is the spring break for.
Is it spring break? Okay.
The week following?
The week following would be fine.
The 23rd. Do we leave it with the team to come back with the proposal, or are you trying to get resolution on it now?
Well, definitely the next meeting, we'll need to know.
So do we make a motion for it? What do we?
Yeah. So what are we proposing?
So through the chair of the committee, if you would like, you could say the next meeting will be February 17th, and then we can discuss the March date at the February meeting,
Oh, right.
if that
Yes.
works.
That seems fine.
That's good.
Seems fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 17th at 3 p.m. right here in the council chambers. And now I need a motion to adjourn.
Please.
Okay, John will move. All in favor? And we are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you guys.